A faint sound traveled across the darkness of space, so weak that it almost disappeared before reaching anywhere. It was not meant for humans. It was not meant for Earth. It was a desperate call, a final cry from a world far away, a world that was dying. But destiny has strange ways of working. Sometimes messages reach the ears of those who were never supposed to hear them, and that is exactly what happened. Late at night, in an observatory on a quiet mountain, a young scientist named Dr. Aidan Reeves noticed a strange flicker on his screen. At first, he thought it was just a glitch. Space is always full of random signals, pulses, radiation bursts, noise from distant stars. But this flicker felt different. It had a pattern. It was repeating. Aidan leaned closer and began running the signal through filters. As each filter cleaned away more noise, the strange flicker started forming a rhythm, almost like someone knocking on a door far away. He called in the rest of the night team. Together, they listened as the signal slowly became stronger. Then suddenly, a broken voice filled the room. It was trembling, full of fear, speaking words no human language could match. But emotion has no language barrier. Every person in that room immediately understood. Someone far away was begging for help. They spent hours decoding the message. Strange symbols, unfamiliar sounds, but behind all of it was pure terror. It described a peaceful colony being attacked, buildings burning, families running, skies filled with enemy ships. Whoever the voice belonged to knew they were dying. The message wasn't even meant for Earth. It was meant for an allied species that lived far beyond human territory. But something had gone wrong. The signal had bounced around damaged satellites, stray asteroids, and eventually found its way to the small blue planet humans called home. News of the discovery moved fast. Before sunrise, military officials, scientists, diplomats, and government leaders were crowded into a meeting hall. The atmosphere was heavy. Everyone knew what this meant. It wasn't just a random noise. It wasn't a prank. It was real. A real voice, real fear, and a real disaster happening somewhere in the galaxy. They replayed the message again and again. The more they listened, the more everyone felt the same sharp pain in their chest. The voice belonged to a species humanity had never met. A soft-spoken, gentle race so different from humans, who were known as fighters, survivors, creatures shaped by a violent planet full of storms, predators, and diseases. Across the galaxy, humans had gained the title Deathworlders, a name both respected and feared. Many believed humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted fully. And now, for the first time, a dying species was unknowingly calling out to the very beings that the galaxy warned others about. Some people argued they should ignore it. "This is not our fight," one leader said. "Helping them could start a war we are not ready for." Another warned, "We don't even know who attacked them." Someone else shouted. Fear filled the room, not fear for themselves, but fear of humanity's own reputation. People worried that if humans responded with force, the galaxy would see it as another example of human violence. But there were others who felt differently. They knew what it meant to be helpless. They remembered humanity's own history: wars, invasions, disasters, and how no one came to help them in their darkest times. Earth had survived on its own strength, its stubborn courage, and its ability to stand again after falling. And now, someone else needed help. Someone weaker, someone begging for mercy. A quiet voice rose from the back of the room. Admiral Kira Holt, a woman who had seen more battles than anyone else present, stood up and said, "If we turn away now, what kind of people are we? We call ourselves stronger, tougher survivors. But strength means nothing if we let innocent lives perish while we sit safely at home." Her words hung in the air. Slowly, heads began to nod. The truth was simple. They were humans. Deathworlders, yes, but also protectors, explorers, builders. They could choose what they wanted their reputation to be. They could choose what future stories would say about them. While the leaders debated, the distress message kept playing in the background, and every time the frightened alien whispered, "Please, anyone, help us," the room grew heavier. Humans were emotional beings. They could not ignore a cry for help, even from a stranger across the stars. Finally, a decision was reached. Humanity would respond. They would send a fleet. They would go to the unknown corner of space where the message originated. They would try to save the colony, not for glory, not for power, but simply because someone needed them. Scientists quickly began tracing the origin of the signal. It came from a region of space barely mapped, far beyond the usual travel routes. They calculated the distance, the time needed to reach it, the possible dangers along the way. Everything looked risky. Everything looked uncertain. But humans were used to uncertainty. Risk was a normal part of their existence. Word spread across Earth and the space stations orbiting it. Soldiers prepared their gear. Pilots checked their ships. Engineers upgraded weapons and shields. Medics packed supplies, hoping they wouldn't be too late. Even civilians gathered around screens, watching updates as the fleet prepared to launch. Many people prayed. Others simply stood in silence, feeling the weight of what was coming. Meanwhile, in their distant world, the aliens who sent the message had no idea anyone had heard them. They believed their signal was lost. They believed no one would come. Their small colony was still fighting for survival, still hoping that anyone would hear their final call. Back on Earth, Dr. Aidan Reeves stepped outside the observatory and looked up at the stars. They seemed brighter that night, almost alive. He knew the world was changing. He felt it deep inside. This was not just a rescue mission. This was the beginning of something bigger, something that would echo across generations. For the first time in history, a random signal had connected to distant worlds. A desperate cry had reached the ears of the one species strong enough to answer it. And although no one knew what waited out there, humanity refused to stay silent. A forgotten colony far across the galaxy had whispered for help, and the Deathworlders had heard them. The message spread across Earth faster than anyone expected. It moved through scientific networks, then military channels, then news broadcasts. Soon, billions of people knew that a distant alien colony was crying for help. But along with that message came something else, an old fear, a memory that humanity could never escape. Across the galaxy, humans were known by a name that carried both respect and fear. It wasn't an insult. It was simply the truth. Earth was a deadly planet, full of dangerous storms, poisonous creatures, violent history, and harsh environments. Any species that evolved there had to be strong to survive. Because of that, humans were seen as powerful but unpredictable, friendly yet dangerous when provoked, compassionate yet terrifying in battle. So when word spread that humans had intercepted a distress signal, people felt a mix of emotions. Some felt proud, others felt scared. Many wondered whether they should get involved at all. This debate started inside government halls, but soon it reached the streets, the schools, the homes, and every corner of human society. Everyone had an opinion, and every opinion was different. Asterisk in the Global Council Hall, leaders from every major nation gathered to decide what humanity should do. They sat around a massive circular table, holographic screens showing the decoded message. The alien voice played softly in the background, trembling with fear. But even with that fear echoing through the hall, the leaders could not agree. One leader, President Vargos of the Terran Union, stood up and said, "We cannot act without knowing the full situation. Responding to a signal meant for another species might be seen as interference." Another leader, Chancellor Morella Fang, added, "If we send help, and the attackers think we are taking sides in their conflict, it could start a war we are not prepared for." But others argued the opposite. Ambassador Liara Khain, known for a strong but gentle voice, said, "Someone reached out for help. Accidentally or not, we heard them. We cannot pretend their suffering doesn't matter." General Orson Hale, a man who had served in 5 different conflicts, said, "Our reputation is already feared, but this is a chance to change it. If we help, we show the galaxy that humanity is not a threat, we are a force for protection." The debate went in circles. For hours, the leaders argued about politics, danger, reputation, and responsibility. The old stories about humanity surfaced against stories of wars, colonization, aggressive expansion. These stories had shaped the galaxy's view of humans, but Earth had changed. Humans had evolved. They were no longer the war-torn species they once were. Yet the galaxy still saw them as Deathworlders, creatures shaped by hardship and violence. People outside the hall watched the debates live. On social media, millions discussed whether humanity should intervene. Some wrote messages full of compassion. "Help them. If we don't, who will?" Others were more cautious. "We don't know the attackers. This could be a trap." And some were emotional. "We're humans. We don't ignore cries for help." Asterisk in a small apartment in Chicago, an elderly woman named Maria watched the signals replay with tears in her eyes. She had lived through past wars, seen cities burn, and lost loved ones. She whispered, "No one helped us when we needed it. Maybe now we can be better." In a classroom in Tokyo, children asked their teacher, "Are the aliens scared like we get scared?" The teacher nodded and said, "Yes, fear is the same everywhere." On a space station orbiting Earth, a group of astronauts watched quietly. One of them finally said, "If it were us out there, drifting and alone, we would want someone to come." The leaders inside the council hall knew the whole world was waiting. They also knew that this decision would shape humanity's future in the galaxy. They weren't just deciding whether to help, they were deciding what kind of species they wanted to be. Meanwhile, military advisors presented reports. The alien colony was located far beyond known space but reachable with advanced FTL drives. The attackers were unknown, but their strength was significant. The risk of sending a fleet was high, but the risk of doing nothing was greater because it would confirm every fear the galaxy had about humans being selfish and dangerous. The room grew quiet when Admiral Kira Holt entered. She was a legend, known for leading peacekeeping missions and negotiating truces in impossible situations. People respected her not because she was feared, but because she was fair, calm, and deeply human. She listened to the debate silently, then finally spoke. "I have read the message. I have studied the threat. I have considered the risks. And I only have one question. If we refuse to help, can we live with ourselves?" Her question echoed through the hall. No one replied, because they knew the answer. She continued, "We can choose fear, or we can choose courage. We can choose to hide, or we can choose to step forward. We can let the galaxy decide who we are, or we can show them." Her words were simple, but powerful. They reminded everyone that humanity had struggled for centuries to escape its violent past, and now they had a chance to prove they were more than their reputation. After hours of discussion, disagreements, and emotional arguments, the final vote was taken. The council decided by a narrow margin that humanity would respond to the distress call, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as rescuers. Once the decision was announced publicly, a strange feeling settled over Earth. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. It was determination. People understood that this mission was risky, but they also felt proud that humanity had chosen compassion over fear and military bases. Soldiers trained harder than ever. They knew they might face a powerful enemy, but they were ready. Engineers worked through nights to prepare the fleet. Medics stocked supplies for injuries they could not predict. Scientists calculated the safest route to the alien colony, hoping they wouldn't arrive too late. And normal people, families, students, workers stood under the night sky, looking at the stars with a new understanding. Somewhere out there, a terrified species was waiting. They didn't know humans had heard them. They didn't know help was on the way. They believed they were alone, but they weren't. Humanity had made its decision. They would go. They would show the galaxy that Deathworlders were not defined by violence. They were defined by courage, empathy, and the stubborn belief that every life mattered. This was no longer just about answering a distress call. This was about rewriting humanity's place in the universe. A legend was about to begin, and every person on Earth felt it in their bones. The decision was made. Humanity would answer the call for help. But deciding was only the beginning. Now came the part that would test their strength, their courage, and their unity. They had to prepare a fleet capable of traveling into unknown space, facing an enemy they had never met, and protecting a species they had never seen. It was a mission filled with risks, but no one stepped back. Instead, across the entire human world, a wave of energy began to rise, an energy made of determination, fear, excitement, and hope. Inside the massive orbital shipyard above Earth, lights flickered on one by one, glowing like stars as preparations began. The space docks, usually quiet and peaceful, suddenly became alive with movement. Engineers ran across bridges. Sparks flew from welding tools, and giant cranes moved heavy armor plates into position. The hum of engines being tested echoed through the metal corridors. Every ship in the emergency fleet needed upgrades: faster engines, stronger shields, improved weapons, expanded medical bays. And in the center of all the activity floated the flagship Resolute Dawn. It was one of humanity's most advanced starships, known not for its size but for its reliability. The ship had traveled through storms of meteors, rescued stranded crews, and escaped battles that should have destroyed it. Now it would lead the mission into a place no human had ever gone. Inside the ship, Captain Arik Rowan walked through the main corridor, inspecting every detail. He was known for his calm mind and fearless leadership. He had fought in battles before, but he had also saved civilians, protected colonies, and made difficult decisions under pressure. He knew this mission wasn't just another operation. This was a chance to show what humans truly were. Crew members saluted as he passed, but he responded with a simple nod. He believed leadership wasn't about pride, it was about responsibility. When he stepped into the command bridge, he found his officers already working. Navigator Ilara Cho was studying the star maps, trying to calculate the safest path to the alien colony. Weapons Officer Darius Kane was testing the targeting systems, making sure everything worked perfectly. The medical chief, Dr. Mira Sandoval, was organizing medical kits while communicating with hospitals to gather extra supplies. Everyone was busy, but there was no panic. There was only purpose. Across Earth, other ships were preparing as well. The Horizon Spear, a fast-response cruiser. The Everlight, a medical transport vessel with advanced equipment. The Ironwind, a heavily armored battleship designed for defense. Smaller escort ships, scouting vessels, supply carriers, all being prepared to form one strong fleet on the training grounds below. Soldiers went through simulations of alien environments. They practiced landing in rough terrain and rescuing civilians under attack. They were not preparing for conquest or domination. They were preparing for protection, for saving lives. That thought gave them strength. In one corner of the training center, a young Marine named Jonas Reed was checking his gear. He wasn't a hero or a famous soldier. He was just a man who believed in doing what was right. When he heard about the alien distress call, he volunteered without hesitation. His friends asked him if he was scared. He said, "Of course I'm scared. But someone out there is more scared than me. And they're alone." These words spread among the troops, becoming something of a quiet motto. Meanwhile, scientists in the Space Research Division studied the alien message carefully, trying to understand the attacker's technology. They found small hints inside the signal sounds of unusual weapons, unfamiliar energy signatures. The attackers were advanced, maybe even more advanced than humans. This information made the mission even more uncertain. But instead of withdrawing, it pushed humanity to prepare harder in the political chambers. Diplomats drafted messages to send once the fleet made contact. They hoped to reassure the alien species that humanity came in peace. They also prepared statements to warn the attackers that harming innocent life was not acceptable. Diplomats often worked with words instead of weapons, but they were just as important. After all, saving a species didn't always mean fighting. It also meant understanding, comforting, and building trust. As the launch day approached, the energy on Earth grew stronger. Families gathered in their homes to watch the news. Children pointed at the screens, imagining themselves flying through space. Old veterans felt a familiar stirring in their hearts, remembering their own battles. People lit candles, prayed, or stood silently at their windows, staring at the night sky. Everyone felt connected, as if this mission was not for governments but for humanity itself. On the final night before departure, Captain Rowan stood on the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn. The stars stretched endlessly before him. Somewhere among them was the frightened alien colony, waiting for help they did not believe would come. He wondered what they looked like. Were they tall or small? Did they have fur, scales, or soft skin? Did they have families who were crying, children who were hiding, elders trying to protect them? He did not know, but he knew one thing: they were afraid, and that was enough reason to go. He placed a hand on the glass and whispered, "Hold on, we're coming." The next morning, the fleet began gathering above Earth. Thousands watched from below as the ships floated into formation, sunlight dancing across their metal hulls. It was a sight that made people's hearts swell. An entire fleet coming together not for war, but for rescue. Inside the Resolute Dawn, the final system check was complete. Engines were stable, shields were active, supplies were loaded. Every crew member was ready. Captain Rowan stood at the center of the bridge. "Open communications to all ships," he ordered. A soft beep confirmed the channel was open. He spoke calmly, his voice carrying strength and hope. "We have chosen to answer a message that wasn't meant for us. We have chosen to help those who cannot help themselves. Today, we show the galaxy that humans do not run from danger when someone cries for help. We face it together. Stay sharp, stay brave, and remember, we are not going to fight a war. We're going to save lives." Across the fleet, every soldier, pilot, medic, and engineer listened in silence. And then, as if connected by one heartbeat, they answered, "Yes, sir." Navigator Cho looked at her screens and said, "Coordinate set, FTL drive ready, engage," Captain Rowan said. In an instant, the engines roared. A bright wave of energy wrapped around the ships, and with a thunderous burst of light, the Deathworlder fleet jumped into the unknown. Earth watched as the lights faded, leaving behind only the quiet, empty sky. The mission had begun. The Deathworlders were on their way, and somewhere far across the galaxy, a dying colony would soon learn that their cry for help had reached the one species powerful and courageous enough to answer it. The fleet's journey through FTL space felt both endless and too fast. Stars stretched like rivers of white light outside the ship windows, and every crew member carried the same silent fear. What would they find when they arrived? Would the alien colony still be alive, or would they reach only ruins? No one spoke their fear out loud, but everyone felt it sitting heavy in their chest. Inside the Resolute Dawn, Captain Rowan stood on the bridge with his officers. The lights were dim, the screens glowing softly as the ship moved through the last stretch of FTL travel. Dr. Myra Sandoval checked her medical station again and again, making sure everything was ready. She whispered a small prayer under her breath. Navigator Cho watched the starfield shifting, her hands steady but her eyes tense. Darius Kane ran a final diagnostic on weapons, though he hoped he wouldn't need to fire them. Finally, Cho looked up. Dropping from FTL in 10 seconds, the tension grew thicker. No one breathed. The ship hummed softly. 3, 2, 1. The fleet fell out of FTL. Then the horror appeared. Where there should have been a peaceful world, full of life and color, there was chaos. The alien colony's planet hung below them, but its surface was burning. Thick smoke rose into orbit like wounded shadows. Fires spread across continents. Explosions glowed like dying stars. In space, broken ships drifted, some belonging to the aliens, others belonging to the attackers. The bridge fell completely silent. Even the strongest hearts felt a chill. Kane whispered, "Dear God." Captain Rowan's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed steady. "Scan for survivors now." The sensors lit up. Cho's face twisted with shock. "I'm reading multiple life signs on the surface. Many are weak, many are hiding, and enemy ships still in orbit." Everyone stiffened. Through the windows, the crew saw the enemy vessels circling the planet like hungry wolves. They were sharp and angular, armed with weapons that glowed with a dangerous blue energy. They were still attacking, still hunting, still destroying. This wasn't a past disaster. This was an ongoing massacre. Rowan reacted instantly. "Send word to all ships. Defensive formation. Shields up. Medical teams prepare for deployment. Marines stand by." All across the fleet, alarms echoed and soldiers rushed into position. Engines roared, weapons charged, medics grabbed emergency packs. But amid all the chaos, one question formed on every human ship: would the aliens think the humans were new attackers? To the frightened colony below, the appearance of another fleet, especially a Deathworlder fleet, would be terrifying. Humanity had a reputation across the galaxy. These aliens had no idea humans were answering their SOS. They had no idea humans had come to help. They had no reason to trust the newcomers. Captain Rowan understood this completely. He opened a channel and spoke in a calm tone. All ships, hold fire unless attacked. The enemy is our target, not the civilians. Protect them without frightening them. The order was simple, but difficult. They had to fight with precision, not passion. They had to defend, not dominate. Just as he finished speaking, one of the enemy cruisers turned toward the Resolute Dawn and opened fire. Blue energy bolts flew across space, hitting the human shields with a thunderous blast. The entire ship trembled. Dr. Sandoval grabbed onto a railing. Kane steadied himself immediately. Shields at 90%. Shaw called out. Rowan didn't hesitate. Return fire. Only enough to disable their weapons. Kane nodded. Aye, sir. The Resolute Dawn fired a controlled burst, fast, sharp, accurate. The enemy ship's cannons exploded, sparks flying into the void. It spun out of control, unable to attack any longer. The battle had begun. Across the fleet, similar fights erupted. Enemy vessels swarmed toward the humans, but they were not prepared for Deathworlder tactics. Human pilots were fast, bold, unpredictable. They weaved between enemy fire, striking with precision. The escorts protected the medical transports, while the battleships created a defensive wall around the planet inside the ships. Marines strapped on their armor, ready to be sent to the ground. Jonas Reed stood in the dropship bay, heart pounding. This was his first real mission outside Earth territory. He whispered the same words he had said back home. Someone out there needs us. On the planet below, the alien civilians hid in tunnels, burned buildings, and shattered shelters. They were a gentle species with soft features, long expressive eyes, and delicate hands. They were not made for war. They were healers, artists, builders, people who had never imagined that invaders would come to kill them. They trembled as distant explosions shook the ground. They heard ships roaring across the sky. They whispered in fear that more attackers had arrived. They didn't know who was fighting above them. They didn't know that humans, the feared Deathworlders, were fighting for them, not against them. In space, after several minutes of fierce combat, Rowan's fleet pushed the enemy ships back. Some fled, some were destroyed. Some were disabled and left drifting. Humanity's arrival had turned the tide, but Rowan didn't waste time celebrating. Prepare landing teams. He ordered, "We're going down." Within minutes, dropships launched from the fleet, streaking down through the planet's burning atmosphere. They passed through smoke clouds, firestorms, and collapsing structures. The pilots fought to keep the ship steady. Inside one dropship, Jonas Reed held onto a metal bar, feeling the heat through the hull. Around him, Marines breathed slowly, steadying their nerves. The moment they landed, the air was thick with smoke and ash. Buildings were falling. The ground shook. Jonas stepped out and immediately spotted a group of aliens huddled behind fallen stones. Their eyes widened in terror at the sight of the armored humans. Jonas lifted his hands slowly, palms open, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're here to help." The aliens didn't understand the words, but they felt the gentleness in his voice. They felt the warmth of his intentions. Their trembling slowed. Above them, one of the alien children weakly reached out and touched Jonas's glove. He froze, then knelt down to the child's level, removing his helmet. When the aliens saw his human face, tired, soot-covered but kind, something changed. Their fear faded, replaced by hope. Dr. Sandoval and her medics rushed forward, treating burns, stopping bleeding, carrying the injured. Human soldiers formed a defensive circle, watching for enemy movement. Meanwhile, other landing teams found groups of survivors trapped under debris. They used their strength to lift heavy slabs of metal and concrete, strength the aliens never imagined a species could have. In another area, a human squad rushed into a burning building to save trapped civilians, ignoring the danger. Everywhere the humans went, their actions spoke louder than any words. They were not monsters. They were not invaders. They were protectors. As explosions echoed farther away, and as the last enemy forces fled the planet, the surviving aliens began to realize the truth, that humans had come because of their distress call, that had come to save them, and for the first time since the attack began, the terrified colony felt something they had nearly forgotten. Safety. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they were on the side of the innocent. The moment the humans landed, the battle changed completely. The enemy had expected frightened aliens, maybe a few defenders, but they did not expect the full force of humanity. They underestimated the Deathworlders' power, their strategy, and their ability to adapt. Humans had survived Earth, a planet that would have killed most species before they even left infancy. Their bodies, minds, and instincts were all trained by a world of storms, earthquakes, diseases, predators, and endless survival challenges. This training made them fierce, fast, and clever, and in this war, it became deadly for their enemies. Captain Rowan watched from the bridge of the Resolute Dawn as the enemy scrambled to regroup. Human pilots darted in and out of space debris, using the planet's orbital debris and asteroids for cover. Their maneuvers were precise and bold. The enemy's energy weapons rarely hit their targets. One by one, human fighters disabled the attackers' cruisers, targeting engines, weapons systems, and command modules rather than firing indiscriminately. They did not want to kill unnecessarily, but they wanted to stop the attackers completely. Asterisk on the ground. Jonas Reed and his squad moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for years, not for battles against other humans, but for rescue, defense, and survival. Now all that training was being tested. The aliens hid behind crumbling buildings, trembling as the humans approached. Jonas knelt beside a young alien girl trapped under a fallen metal beam. The girl's large, soft eyes were wide with fear. Jonas lifted the beam with his squad, the humans' combined strength easily moving it. The child ran to her parents, who embraced her tightly, tears streaming down their faces. The humans did not linger for thanks. Their next priority called. In another part of the city, medics like Dr. Myra Sandoval worked tirelessly. They moved from one injured alien to another, using portable medical kits, setting broken limbs, stopping bleeding, and calming panic. Some aliens were burned, some wounded by debris, and some shocked nearly to death by the violence around them. Dr. Sandoval treated them all with gentle hands and calm words, with showing patience that these beings had never known. Slowly, trust began to form between human and alien. Where fear had ruled, hope now started to grow. Meanwhile, the enemy tried to retaliate. They regrouped in orbit, preparing to strike again. But the humans were ready. The Resolute Dawn led the fleet in a coordinated assault. Firing with precision, the human ships tore through the attackers' formation. They targeted weapons, engines, and command centers, disabling them without destroying every vessel. Humans were fighting to win, not to kill. Their strategy combined logic, instinct, and a willingness to take risks the enemy could not predict. Each move was calculated, but it also carried the raw ferocity of a species shaped by survival against impossible odds. Back on the planet, Jonas's squad encountered a group of aliens surrounded by enemy drones. The drones were small, fast, and deadly. Many species would have frozen in fear. Humans did not. The squad coordinated silently, moving in perfect harmony. Jonas picked up a drone and hurled it into another, causing it to explode. Another squad member used an energy net to disable two more. Within minutes, the aliens were safe. Jonas looked at the survivors, breathing heavily. For the first time, they were not hiding, they were free, protected by beings they had once feared. The battle stretched across multiple areas simultaneously. The humans were everywhere. They used their environment to their advantage, turning ruined buildings into defensive positions, using the streets like mazes, and coordinating attacks that the enemy could not predict. Engineers hacked enemy drones, shutting them down, repurposing them to protect civilians instead of attacking. Every human knew that killing was sometimes necessary, but saving lives was the priority. From the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Rowan monitored the fight. He could see every movement, every fireburst, every alien life sign. The humans were pushing forward, clearing zones, protecting civilians, and dismantling enemy forces systematically. Rowan felt a surge of pride, not the kind born from victory over another human, but the kind born from defending the helpless. This was the moment humanity had trained for in every disaster, every war, every storm on Earth. They were finally applying all of that strength for a purpose greater than themselves. In one sector, Dr. Sandoval watched as Jonas's squad rescued a wounded alien father trapped under a collapsed building. The man was weak, dehydrated, and terrified. As they lifted him to safety, he looked into Jonas's eyes. In that silent moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection formed not by language, but by trust, courage, and the willingness to act when others could not. As the humans pressed their advantage, the enemy grew desperate. They unleashed their remaining forces, but by now, the humans had already adapted to their tactics. Pilots anticipated their moves, Marines predicted their strategies, and medics prepared for casualties before they occurred. The humans' coordination and efficiency made the enemy look clumsy, disorganized, and ultimately doomed. Even in the midst of battle, the humans showed restraint and mercy. Enemy soldiers who surrendered were taken as prisoners, not executed. Civilians caught in the crossfire were shielded and evacuated. Engineers repaired vital structures while bombs still fell nearby. Their actions were a mixture of fury, precision, and compassion, a combination the attackers could not comprehend. Humanity's ferocity was directed at the threat, not the innocent. That was what made them terrifying, but also admirable. By the afternoon, the humans had turned the tide completely. Enemy ships in orbit were disabled or destroyed. Enemy ground forces were either captured, retreating, or eliminated with minimal civilian casualties. Slowly, the smoke cleared, and the surviving aliens began to emerge from hiding. They stared in awe at the humans who had saved them, still armored and tense, but victorious. They had expected monsters, but instead found protectors. Captain Rowan allowed himself a small moment of relief. The battle was not completely over, but the colony was now safe. Humanity had demonstrated its unique strength, ability to fight ruthlessly when necessary, yet act with care and protection for those who could not defend themselves. Across the planet, humans moved from one zone to another, ensuring that every survivor was rescued, every injured treated, and every threat neutralized. Jonas Reed and his squad took a moment to catch their breath. Around them, aliens helped each other, guided by humans. For the first time, they felt hope. For the first time, they understood that not all powerful beings were threats, that perhaps the universe was not as cruel as it seemed. As night fell, the fires on the planet slowly burned out. Emergency teams worked to rebuild temporary shelters. Human medics and engineers coordinated with the aliens to stabilize their world. Communication teams sent messages back to the fleet, confirming that the civilians were safe and the attackers had been pushed back. On the resolute dawn, Captain Rowan looked at the planet below. It was scarred, damaged, and tired, but it was alive. Humanity had arrived, fought with precision and courage, and saved lives. They had unleashed their fury against those who threatened the helpless, but they had done so with purpose, restraint, and honor. For the first time, the aliens looked at humans not with fear, but with admiration. They began to see them as saviors, guardians, and protectors. Humanity had shown the galaxy what the Deathworlders could truly be, not just survivors, not just fighters, but champions of life itself. The battle was over. The humans had unleashed the full force of Earth's strength, tempered with wisdom and compassion. And in that moment, something began to change, not just the alien colony, but the very story of humanity among the stars. They were no longer just feared. They were respected. They were admired. And for the first time, the Deathworlders' true legacy began to take shape. The humans looked around at each other, exhausted but unbroken. They had fought for something bigger than themselves. They had saved the world. And somewhere deep in their hearts, they knew that this was only the beginning. The battle was over, but the story was far from finished. The alien colony below looked around at the wreckage in devastation, still in disbelief. They had expected death, fire, and destruction, but not salvation. When the humans had arrived, the aliens had feared them first. They had seen the armored soldiers, the massive ships, and the sheer force of their arrival. To a species unaccustomed to power, humans had seemed like monsters at first. But then, as the humans fought, something extraordinary happened. They realized that these death so feared across the galaxy were fighting not for conquest, not for domination, but to protect the weak, to save the helpless, to defend life itself. Everywhere the humans went, they acted with both ferocity and compassion. Soldiers carried injured aliens from collapsed buildings. Medics treated burns and injuries with steady hands. And engineers repaired damaged shelters while under the threat of remaining enemy forces. No civilian was left behind. Every child, elder, and family received aid. And as the aliens watched, slowly and carefully, their fear turned into wonder, and then into trust. For the first time in their lives, they felt safe. Captain Rowan stood on the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn, overlooking the planet's surface. From above, the world looked battered but alive. Smoke still curled into the sky. Fires flickered in some areas, but lights were beginning to shine from shelters where humans and aliens worked together. Rowan could feel the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, and yet he also felt an unfamiliar warmth of quiet pride. Humanity had come across the stars not as predators, but as guardians. They had done what no other species dared to do. They had answered a desperate plea for help. Jonas Reed walked among the survivors with his squad, helping organize food, water, and temporary shelters. A small alien boy clung to his hand, staring up at him with wide eyes. Jonas had been afraid before the mission, unsure of what they would find. But now, holding the child's small hand, he realized something important. This was what being human truly meant. It wasn't about strength, or weapons, or battles. It was about choosing to act for those who could not act for themselves. News of humanity's actions began to spread across the alien colony. They whispered among themselves, telling stories of brave soldiers who risked their lives to save children trapped in burning buildings. They told of pilots who dove into enemy fire to protect civilians, engineers who hacked enemy drones to shield rather than destroy. Every story reinforced the idea that humans were different from what they had feared. They were not monsters, they were saviors. Dr. Myra Sandoval moved through the shelters, checking on patients and giving comfort where words were not enough. She saw a mother holding a wounded child, and gently guided the child to her medkit. The mother hesitated, unsure if she could trust the humans. But as she saw the careful, tender way Dr. Sandoval treated the child, tears filled her eyes. She whispered softly to the nurse, "They came for us. They saved us." Elsewhere, engineers worked with the aliens to repair damaged infrastructure. Alien builders watched in awe as humans lifted heavy debris with ease, moving materials that would have taken dozens of aliens hours to shift. It was not just strength, they had skill, coordination, and ingenuity. They repaired buildings, cleared streets, and restored basic communication systems. In the process, they showed the aliens that humans could be both powerful and precise, strong yet careful. The survivors slowly began to come out of hiding. They had lived in fear for days, thinking every shadow was an enemy, every noise a threat. Now, seeing humans moving among them with protection and care, they dared to step forward. They looked around at the devastation, and for the first time, hope began to bloom in their hearts. They were not alone. They had allies. They had guardians. Captain Rowan observed from the Resolute Dawn as human and alien forces worked together to rebuild the city. He saw pilots landing to deliver supplies, Marines helping carry water and food, medics treating the sick, and engineers repairing shelters. The humans were everywhere, moving tirelessly, acting without pause, focused on one goal: saving lives. Rowan realized that this was more than a mission, it was a statement. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it was capable of when it chose courage and compassion over fear and aggression. In the following days, the human fleet continued to patrol the planet, ensuring that the attackers could not return. They did not seek revenge, but they were relentless in defense. Enemy forces who dared to approach were met with precise, overwhelming force. Humanity's presence became a shield around the alien colony, and for the first time, the aliens could sleep without fear. The impact of humanity's actions began to ripple across the galaxy. Messages were transmitted to nearby star systems. Rumors spread of a species that answered a distress call no one else dared touch, of humans who fought with unmatched skill but for the purpose of protection, not conquest. Other civilizations began to speak of the Deathworlders, not only as survivors or warriors, but as protectors. The story of their courage, restraint, and compassion began to inspire those who had only known fear. Back on the planet, Captain Rowan held a meeting with his senior officers. They reviewed the mission, analyzed the effectiveness of their strategy, and planned the next steps for rebuilding and supporting the colony. Rowan spoke calmly, yet with authority. This is what we were trained for. This is what humanity is capable of. We acted with strength, with intelligence, and with heart. The galaxy has seen what we can do when we choose to protect rather than destroy. Let's make sure we continue to be worthy of this trust. Meanwhile, small groups of humans continued to work with the aliens on the ground. They taught them how to rebuild homes safely, how to use technology they had never seen, and how to communicate with nearby systems. They showed them how to defend themselves if needed, but always emphasized restraint and caution. The humans were not just rescuers, they were mentors, guides, and examples of what a powerful species could be when its strength was used wisely. As the days passed, the aliens began to celebrate their survival. They created small gatherings to honor the humans who had saved them. Songs, stories, and paintings began to emerge, depicting the armored soldiers carrying children, pilots diving through explosions, and medics healing the wounded. They named the humans Guardians of the Flame, a title that symbolized protection, courage, and hope. Each story told and retold strengthened the bond between the species, turning fear into admiration and respect. For the humans, the mission was not just about fighting, it was about connection. They learned about the alien culture, their language, their traditions, and their values. They listened, they shared, and they taught. And through this exchange, humanity realized something important. Strength without compassion was meaningless, but strength used to protect others could create legends. Captain Rowan stood once again on the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn. The planet below was still scarred, but life was returning. Fires had been extinguished, shelters repaired, and hope reborn. Humans and aliens walked side by side, working, talking, and laughing cautiously for the first time in days. Rowan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had faced the unknown, risked their lives, and saved a species that had believed themselves doomed. They had proven that humanity's power could be used for good, and in doing so had begun to rewrite the story of humans among the stars. As the fleet prepared to return to Earth, the humans and aliens exchanged messages of gratitude. Children waved from the rebuilt streets, families hugged and cried, and elders nodded respectfully. The colony had survived, and they owed their lives to beings they had once feared. The humans left behind a lasting presence, not a permanent occupation, but a memory, a lesson, and a bond that would endure. Across the galaxy, the story of the Deathworlders' bravery spread quickly. Other civilizations began to see humans in a new light. No longer were they just survivors of a harsh planet. No longer were they merely fighters or conquerors. They were protectors, champions of life, and examples of courage combined with compassion. Legends began to form, stories whispered from one star system to another, of humans who answered a call no one else would, who faced impossible odds, and who saved a civilization on the brink of extinction. Back on Earth, millions watched the news of the mission's success. People cheered, cried, and celebrated. Humanity had not only saved lives in another corner of the galaxy, but they had also transformed their own reputation. Across every continent, a sense of pride spread. The Deathworlders had done more than survive. They had become a symbol of hope, courage, and honor. Captain Rowan finally allowed himself to relax. He looked at his crew, exhausted but alive, and said softly, "We went to the stars and did what humans do best. We protected, we saved, we stood for those who could not stand for themselves. This is the story we will carry with us, and the story the galaxy will remember." And somewhere in the hearts of the rescued aliens, in the songs, stories, and paintings they created, the humans lived on as legends. A species once feared for its ferocity had become a beacon of hope. The galaxy had witnessed the Deathworlders' fury unleashed in defense of the helpless, and in that fury, a legend was born. Humanity had answered the call. Humanity had saved lives. Humanity had ignited the stars. The legacy of this mission would last for generations. It would be told in classrooms, council halls, and spaceships. It would inspire other civilizations to act with courage and compassion. And as humans returned to Earth, tired but proud, they carried with them the knowledge that the universe now saw them not just as survivors, but as heroes. For the first time, the Deathworlders were no longer only feared. They were revered. They were legends. And somewhere, across the stars, their story would burn bright forever.